What's up, wild animals? I'm Melanie Vesey, and welcome to another Promotional Rescue talk show. I'm a stand-up comedian, actress, and filmmaker, and if you want to see any of my work, my comedy special, my movies, you can do that over at melanievesey.com. But I'm also a promotions consultant with my own company called Promotional Rescue, where I teach people how to promote themselves without feeling gross. And on this talk show, I talk with people from all corners of the industry about how they deal with their promotion, how they deal with an audience, the good, the bad, and the ugly about doing all of this stuff. And you can watch all of this for free on all of my social media and what have you. This show also plays on Wednesdays at noon on Comedy Hub. Please go over and subscribe to them over on Twitch. But the second part of this, where I have more in-depth conversations, is over on my Patreon, to which you can support me and this show. Any donation, large or small or whatever, it will all just goes to help me keep this podcast going and my other creative endeavors. And you can get all that information at patreon.com/Melanie Vesey. But on the show today, oh my God, Justin Warfield. You know him as the frontman of She Wants Revenge. I'm sure you've heard these songs a million times because they are so dope. Justin is a fantastic musician. He does producing, he does movies, he's writing, he's doing all kinds of stuff. And Justin has had a fantastically beautiful long career here in Los Angeles, signed to a record label at 16 years old. And he's been performing and doing all of this stuff this entire time. And Justin, I could have talked to Justin for 100 hours. He is so smart. He understands this so much from all ends of being in front of the camera, behind the camera, next to the camera, on top of the camera, holding the camera, what have you. He truly does understand what it is to connect with an audience. And we really do talk about also too how he's had to pivot during the pandemic, how he deals with an audience in that way. He's been doing some IG lives and what have you, and how that's been going on, what's been going on with She Wants Revenge, and how he wants to plan this next chapter, how he wants to take what the career that he's had post-pandemic and how he wants to connect with that. And also too, what that means to him as far as reaching an audience. What does that look like? How do you do that? How do you connect with an audience after and during what we have been going through in the past year and change? You guys, this is a fantastic talk. It is a long one because I just could listen to Justin talk forever. So I hope you enjoy this one, you guys. Thanks so much and keep watching. Hey, Justin.
Hello.
Howdy do. Thank you so much for joining me today. First off, it's really good to see you.
I know, it's good to see you. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute, and I was actually just thinking about you were probably one of the first 10 people that I met in LA when I moved here many moons ago. And I wanted to talk to you today because, you know, you've had from what I can see from the outside, a fantastic career in music, all of the things that happen in music. And I want to talk about your promotional journey as far as like what that means to you to promote your music and the people that you work with and collaborate with and do all of that stuff. And I know that when it comes to indie music, or even when you're with a label, how you have to partner your music with promotion. And how that journey has been for you over time.
Yeah. That's the big one, right? Like, 'cause, most of the time creatives and artists don't feel comfortable promoting themselves for whatever reasons, of thinking it's not cool, or, that sort of weird self-worth thing. There's like a million tie-ins, but I don't know, like the first thing I guess that came to mind was, ironically, for somebody that doesn't like self-promotion, is that when I was born into the music industry, and my dad was a promotion person.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's funny that my dad literally was like a very sort of acclaimed and famous promo man. So it's really antithetical to who I am. I'm really I love promoting other people. I
Mm.
love, I'm, I'm the first person to copy and paste or share or, rave and, give glowing reviews to somebody else's art and post it and share it with the world. But it's weird doing it with yourself, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's why with the old model was, we hired a PR person. You had this buffer, you had this gap in between you and the thing, and it did make it easier. And also too, in just what you're saying, when I have to talk about, whether it's clients or because I started in traditional PR, I could shout it from the mountaintops how amazing this person was. However, I noticed, and this is why my company was kind of born, which was that I would get them these interviews, radio, whatever, festivals. And then I would be like, okay, great. Now you've got to talk about it. And then they would just either clam up or they would focus a lot on negative stuff. You know what I mean? How hard this was, how shitty this is. We live in a van, we eat dog food. And I'm like, oh, but can you talk about the fact that you've got like David Bowie's producer on this? You know what I mean? Like, so it's very interesting to me how we become self-deprecating, and there's this weird cringy thing that happens, and which for me is painful to watch because I feel like it undermines or undercuts the music or the project, whatever it is,
Right.
so.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting too, because I mean, I think that's a cultural thing, because the truth is if you find a young rapper, if you find like, and like, I think there's also like, I think there's sociological and I think there's sociological and I think there's cultural differences. Like, for instance, right, like as like sort of is the sort of long-standing but very true and apropos like idiom that like I'm black and I'm Jewish, so like there's two different cultural things at work there, right? I don't consider it the religion of Judaism, it's more the culture, right? And
Yeah.
like one is known for self-deprecation and one is known for, like, if you're really being reductive to the stereotypes, one is
Yes.
known for self-deprecation and one is known for more braggadocio. And the truth is that indie rock guys, if you were to interview them about their tour, they are going to be more for every strokes or we're going to take over the world, to the toppermost of the poppermost, like the Fab Four did, in the sort of Hard Day's Night era of Beatles, that sort of we're going to take over the world braggadocio and self-confidence is very, at a certain point that became very uncool in the rock and
Yes.
roll or alternative rock or indie rock world. And like I know where that comes from. It's basically like if you trace it, right, and so I'm sort of going a little off track, but here's the two tracks of how that works in music is I think it's also I'm talking about a male dominated thing, because I think when you add the female component and you add what it's like to be a woman, right, or what it's like to be somebody who's from the LGBTQ community, there's all these intersectional things that make it easier, harder, more
Yeah.
niche or whatever. But if you're talking
Yes.
about like white male dominated music, if you look at through the 60s and 70s and sort of one hit wonders, really like album oriented bands, whether you're talking about the Led Zeppelins and the Floyds, you had these bands that were either really artsy or introspective and they didn't need to talk about it because the music and the art spoke for themselves.
Yes.
And then you had the 70s and you had sort of like the soft rock movement. And then in the 80s, you had like hair metal and butt rock, right? And this whole thing. And it was all about, oh, we're just going to be so wasted in the interview and we're going to be crazy and funny. And it's everything from like, you can name 100 bands that fit that category of where they were playing a role in interviews. But what
Mm.
happened is that also in the 80s, the roots of alternative rock started in England and in the US, and you have Husker Du and you have the Replacements and
Mm.
you have REM and you have the Smiths, and you had more introspective artists that were album oriented artists like the 60s and 70s artists who are more quiet and talking only about the art and not the bullshit, right? So
Yes.
you had this sort of weird confluence of introspective artists who wanted to put the focus on the art and be taken seriously, with these sort of caricature 80s guys who just wanted to be famous and have girls eating cherry pie on a car in a video. And then what happened is when I, in my estimation, when you had Jane's Addiction and REM
Mm.
as the two bands that really were the catalysts that sort of broke alternative rock, and then Sonic Youth and Nirvana took it over the edge in '91. What happened was once Nirvana and Weezer and that sort of era of music and '90s music killed butt rock and killed
Yeah.
hair metal,
Yeah.
the punk rock that came from that movement, the punk rock guilt attached made it so that you were no longer allowed to self promote. Right. And
Yes.
so when punk rock guilt entered the whole thing, then all of a sudden you had a generation of bands who wanted to be famous but felt guilty for it and so wouldn't say it out loud. And what's interesting is that's just like one tract of it, because where I come from is from hip hop. And I
Yes.
started making music in hip hop in 1991. And when you were a hip hop artist, it was entirely based on either getting, like, the roots of it, obviously, block parties, being outgoing, being an MC, being a personality, that whether you're at a, you know, a block party in the South Bronx or a roller rink in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
whether you're at a club, you have to have personality. You have to, you're like a comic. You're like, you're not going to go out there and be like Stephen Wright. You have to like get people going. You have to be
Yes.
bigger and broader. And so, and then also because there's competition built in and like baked into the pie of hip hop, then you were, if it was something about, even if you weren't a brag rapper, you were still, songs were either reflecting your environment or your experience. And so you're telling people who you are. It's not
Mm.
esoteric. You're not Michael Stipe talking about something that's unclear or metaphoric or, you know, these allegories are like pretty pictures. You're basically saying, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, this is my experience. And when you get in an interview, whether it's like written or whether it's on the radio or later like video and MTV and BET and all that stuff, you were like, here's who I am. And do you curse on your podcast?
Oh yeah. Oh my God.
Okay.
Yes, please. Fucking
Not pod,
swear.
sorry. So it's like people were just like, look, this is who I am and I'm the fucking best, and
Yes.
I'm gonna change the world. And so it's really stereotyped that like hip hop is braggadocio, but the truth is culturally, when you're coming from less and you're hungry and you want it, you're not gonna walk in the room and be like, I think you might like me. You're gonna like, you know, it's like if you think about the there's this scene in the film Crush Groove where
Mm.
LL Cool J basically breaks, you know, walks into the dorm, the office of what was meant to be Rick Rubin's office, and he's just like, you know, and he just throws the radio down on the desk, the big boom box, and he's just like,
Yes.
here's who I am. And like that's the spirit of hip hop. So like I feel like those are the two sort of paths that bands have operated in.
Mm.
and I think that hip hop still to this day, even though you can be album oriented, very serious, very introspective and very thoughtful, you're still not afraid to be like, I'm the shit, and like you have to listen to me. And I think that guitar oriented or indie rock or alternative rock bands tend to, unless they like are some weird anomaly that appears and is like, we're going to take over the world, we're the best band in the world, and even that's a press angle and that's like a fabrication, because that's not, most people don't really feel like that. So I feel like
Mm.
those two sort of lanes still exist. And I've always, to be honest, like as a person, as it pertains to promotion, like that's just sort of the cultural background of, I think, what frames our ideas. And like I said, like, then how do you add yourself to that mix if you're a woman and you're also, then you're just exponentially less people and less avenues for a point of entry and less representation. And what are you going to say when you know you're the dopest person in the room,
Yes.
let alone, but like you're not defining yourself like I'm the best woman in the room, you're like I'm the best, and you want to go tell everybody how fucking incredible your lyrics are and how incredible your music is and how you're a real artist and you want to be taken seriously. But then they ask you about dumb shit and you can't just be
Ugh. Yeah.
like it's crazy. Like, and like also the idea that as a band, the truth is that when you do press, people aren't generally, unless it's a really like deep think piece by a real thoughtful journalist, historically, when you're doing press, they just read or listen to or watch your last interview and
Yeah.
ask you similar questions. And exemplified by the one of the worst interviews I ever did was in a radio station on a weekend, that was a radio station that was incredibly supportive to my band, but
Mm.
like the like normal jock wasn't there. And they were asking us these questions, and this is after being like one of the biggest bands on their station for a year. And I was so blown away that this person had no idea about us. And I looked kind of over their desk and saw that like our Wikipedia page was open. And I was
Mm.
like, this is crazy that you're reading from this with these talking points. Or maybe it was another interview, but whatever it was just bonkers to me. So for me, as it pertains to self-promotion and promotion in general, like I said, like I'm happy to promote the shit out of your project, right? Um, but again, like I think also in the age of social media, like you can only go to the well so many times, right? And so you can only like, just like if you have like some, there's only like, you can only rub the lamp so many times, right? um or the bottle, what is it? So
The
yeah,
lamp.
so the
It's the
lamp,
lamp.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Message in a bottle, genie in a
message in the
lamp.
bottle, genie in a lamp, yeah. um but like you can only do that so many times. So like you can't cry wolf and be like, this is like the best new artist, you have to check this out. You have to find a way, if you're posting things on social media. And I mean, it's a whole other subject, but like that barrier to your fans when Facebook and in turn Instagram basically said, oh, you have 50,000 fans. Well, we're going to create an algorithm by which like you can post this, but 250 people are going to see it. But if you like pay, then we'll unlock another 1,000 of your people in these things. So there's so many
Exactly.
barriers, right? So like if you're just
Yes.
talking about, if the first barrier is internal and like you're like,
Yes.
how do I tell people about my thing? I think for me, I fall somewhere between the two lanes where I'm a serious artist who does things for the sake of the art and following an idea or a question that the art arises from, like asking a question about the human condition or relationships or the culture or something from a lyrical standpoint, exploring the sound and music and whatever obsession I have at the moment, making a record and knowing that it's the dopest shit and knowing my worth and my value and being like, this is fucking incredible, and it fucking shits on so much of what's out there because there's so much garbage that's just pumped, either by virtue of there's anybody can get in the game and anybody like could just make a record and just throw it
Yes.
out there, or
Yes.
major labels are just still promoting pop products that are the
Yes.
product of laboratory writing experiments and sort of, and young bands too now really, I mean, on of their own volition, because the entry point is so narrow now that some bands are just writing songs that sound like they're auditioning to be car commercials.
Yes.
So like they just on their own are like, hey, you don't have to mold us. We want to be successful. We know. And like if people sort of, if things like if the cream of not quality but success rises and rises and rises, and it gets more and more and more poppy, young bands aren't going to like meet each other through the back of like a classified ad. It's like, hey, like want to start a band, into Susie and the Banshees
Right.
and The Cure and My Bloody Valentine, Sonic Youth. They're just going to listen to what's out there and go, oh, I want to sound like that car commercial too.
Yeah.
And then they start writing songs that sound like,
Yes.
you know, commercial. It's crazy. So I have that confidence and that knowledge of self to know how good what I'm doing is and the validity, but at the same time, not wanting to come off like a dick and not
Yes.
wanting to be like, look, like this is super fucking good and you should check it out because it's amazing. And the older I get, I feel like the latter is a lie. Like that you should
Mm.
be able to like you learn punk rock guilt, you learn self-deprecation, you learn those things, or it's beaten into you somehow, right? So like I think that now, were I to have something to promote, I think there's a way to be humble
Yes.
and also really confident.
Yes.
And why, it's almost like if you're not some hip, jaded, cynical, savvy consumer, if you're just like Joe or Jane Public and somebody's like, I don't know, I think this like album's really good, I hope you listen to it, why would you listen to that over somebody that's like, this is the best thing I ever done, I can't wait for people to hear it?
Mm. You guys, welcome to Justin's TED Talk. That was the best. That was like from top to bottom. You took us from the Beatles to Zeppelin to fucking Crush Groove. You took us to like your experience. That was so, I'm totally like, when I can talk with people and like nerd out about shit and have them like equally nerd out about it, like when you know something, like that was so awesome to hear. And I loved what you were talking about people playing roles, that they play a role when they're doing this, right? So, and then in the end, you kind of summed it up to like, how do I fit in as far as like who I am, and how do I choose from this? Because ultimately you just want to be of service to the art. And even though I do a show about promotion, and I say this almost on every single show, for me, I'm always like, this is to be of service to the art. I am never going to tell you that don't worry about the art, just be a fucking promotional machine. That's never my message. That is never, that's not what I'm on board for. That's not what I'm here for. What I have just seen over time is that I've seen, I think sometimes my most talented clients are the worst promoters. And I'm like,
oh, for sure.
Like,
yeah.
And that's what's challenging, because my youngest,
you don't get that gene doesn't, you don't get both. You really just don't. Like, it's very rare that you do that. Right.
Yeah. But what's hard though is my super talented, established fucking authorities in whatever it is that they're doing, they are in the same pool with my new jacks who are promoting this. You know what I mean? They're promoting their sandwich. They're talking about everything. And they're in the same pool, and it's like the noise is loud, and it's like, how do I get everybody in the middle where I'm just totally like, work on your shit. Stop talking about every fucking single thing. You know what I mean? Like, spend the time in the studio, or spend the time writing, spend the time. And then how do I get my established people to embrace this and understand that it's like, they do have to find a way to connect with an audience in the same way that they're on stage. You know what I mean? You connect when you're on stage, you connect when you're doing this. How do you find, and I like the way that you said like your role, but how do you do it in a genuine way? Like, how do you bring your genuine self to it?
And also, like, you know, I can speak from my experience of having, you know, I've been talking into a microphone on a radio or television for more than 30, like professionally for 29 years, but like, you know, first got on a radio station to just like say what's up or give a shout out, like as in high school, like being just like at like the big rap station in LA, and I would go up because I had a relationship through my dad who's doing promo, and so like my friends would be like talking about music, and I'm like, oh, we can go up to K-Day, which was this really the biggest, and K-Day, like, you know, very inside baseball, but if as Angelinos, right, like K-Day, like, I don't know if you know this, but it was in Echo Park where you see those 3 radio towers on Glendale Boulevard when you're going over Glendale, and you're going deep into Echo Park. Those 3 radio towers up there was where it was, and at the time it was a really, really, really gnarly sort of localized Echo Park gang area. Yeah, and it was not very safe to just randomly drive through there. And I used to bring my friends up there to go to the radio station. And because I knew the program directors, they'd be like, hey, Justin, what's up? And they let me and a couple buddies in the booth, and we'd pick out a couple of carts before you had MP3s, and there's this weird big boxes they'd plug in that look like 8 tracks, and they'd play the songs. And then I get on the radio and I give a shout out. So I was used to being in front of a microphone and talking on air in a sort of, when you're like live out on a wire, like that, like, okay, whatever you say, it's out there. Right? Yes. And so one of the biggest things in promotion in sort of the old industry 1 and 2.0 ways was, okay, like whatever you say, be careful. And you had PR people sort of grooming you, and like, whether you're sitting in the green room at Letterman on the highest stage, or whether you're sitting with a publicist, and they're like, okay, like, let's write your bio, tell me about yourself, like, what are you going to put out there? Like, people don't realize, like, when you write that bio, those are the things that people are going to ask you about for like 1 to 20 years.
Yes.
And like, those are the
Yes.
things that are going to get recycled. And
Yes.
like, promotion, whether you're looking at it as like a celebrity going on a talk show and telling an anecdote, and then getting the laughs, and then like at the end they promote the product, right, that they currently have, or whether it's a band, or whether it's an actor promoting the latest movie, and they sort of go on a talk show and they talk about like a funny anecdote, ha ha ha, and they do the thing, and then they show a clip, and movies in theaters now. Or whether it's a band who's got a record coming out, whatever those little things, those little nuggets that an interviewer can latch onto, are going to be the things you talk about. And I think the thing is that the artist isn't prepared to be asked that 500 times, and they get bored with it. And so you have to like find a way to, it's like live theater. It's like, how are you going to, in the moment, experience it as if the first time?
Yes.
Because the interviewer, in Toledo, Ohio, who's on the radio with you, asking you, the same 4 questions, you have to find a way to give them the same passion and interest and soundbite that you did the first time when you were happy to answer that question.
Yes. Yeah, no, it is my first order of business when I'm working with clients is to write a bio before we do anything. And that's because the bio lives usually on their website, or goes out on a press release or what have you. And it is the thing that most people see first. And it's also what they steal for their own purposes. They just copy and paste it and put it on their podcast, or copy and paste it and put it in their, And so I usually help people talk about, what they've done, the inspiration behind what they do, which I feel like can activate a person. Because when you talk about those aha moments, why you do what you do is like, that is what propels us always, right? It's like that passion inside of us. So I find that when people use their bio and they talk in first person, which I always think is a mistake, or they are self-deprecating, or they know that this is a joke, that I'm writing this, you know what I mean? Like they bring all this like ugh to it, you know what I mean? And it's like, no, we all know this sucks. Like everybody has to do it, you know what I mean?
Right,
but hook yourself up, hook yourself to your future self up, you know what I mean? Yes, this is going to be the thing that needs to be a standalone, that yes, like what you're saying, like, oh my God, someone's going to get a hold of this forever and talk about that one time, or talk about, well, you mentioned this and how's that going or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, how can I make this fresh? So in your time of, you've had solo stuff, and then She Wants Revenge, where you were with multiple people. What was that also like too with multiple people? Because I do know that like when I'm working with multiple people in a project, that can be very challenging as well, because you also have different personalities coming forward. There's usually sometimes one person that maybe comes forward and does a lot more talking. Mm-hmm. Did you find that it was very challenging because you had to deal with everybody else's issues around this?
Well, She Wants Revenge was I was signed as a solo artist when I was 16, and I did solo work. I was always a solo artist. Even when I had a band, it was usually something that I was like, the sort of more like the therapist would be like, well, you're hiding behind a band because you don't want to be out front. But it was always just like, well, I want a band. I just want a bunch of dudes, and I want to be a part of something. I don't want it to just be me. But it was always really like first record, solo record, second record, me, and I had guys playing with me. I was signed by myself, and I just let them participate. Then after that, solo, and but like, duo, I brought somebody along. So when She Wants Revenge happened, there was 2 people. One person with myself who was at the core of that group. And then we had people that played live with us that were the band. But as
Oh yeah.
far as the spokesman and recording interviews, just myself and a partner. And what was interesting about that was he had never been in a band before. He had never done press before. He was a DJ who is always behind the scenes. So like somebody who's like up in a booth
Yeah.
communicating in a very different way, right? Or in a studio behind the scenes. So and I had all this wealth of experience. So he was like, "What do we do?" And I was like, "This is how we do it. Watch." And so and even watch became like, somebody asks a question, I take the lead, and then I pass the ball. And then he would have his moment. And then when I knew that either it was time for me to jump back in and reroute, either I would take the next question, or if it was time for me to pivot it and get it back to interviewer, I know the natural flow and rhythm. And I go, right, like in regards to that, boom, 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 like, and even like this, and then take it back and really steering the ship. And after enough of those, he, without having, I don't even know if it was ever verbalized, but he's like,
Right.
okay, right. So you're dribbling up the court, you pass me the rock, I like take a shot, and then like you get the next one, or I miss, you get the rebound, like, and he sort of would see the ebb and flow of it. And to be really honest, I think also it was very clear to me that even without saying it, he also realized the role, which is one of honesty, but restraint, right? So
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah. Understood.
so like sometimes the role is like, people are like, oh, like just effusive, I want you to love me. That was never the role. It was the role, if we were to use that word, is thoughtful, careful consideration of words, not saying too much, holding things back, and just being really thoughtful about what's being put out there. And because it was his first band, there was a lot of things where he just looked at me like, hey, like, how are we doing this? Like, we made this music together, but everything else of that machine outside of it, whether it's dealing with fans, dealing with, people when there's 150 people in line at the merch booth, and how do you communicate with them, whether you're at a meet and greet, whether you're on, a talk, like, Letterman, Conan, like all those things that were a part of our experience.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, here's how we play this. And I don't even know that I verbalized it. Was probably just like by example, right? Like, here's how we do this. And then there's definitely, like you said, challenges. There's definitely challenges. Yeah. Sometimes they just want to ask the singer everything, and then somebody's super bummed. You know what I mean?
I mean, we've all seen Almost Famous, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like these issues are real. And I also feel like I talk a lot on this show too about healthy collaborations, which means working with other people. What does that look like when there's more than one person in on this? And which means more than one person has to then also be on the front lines of an audience, you know what I mean? And then how do we have a collective consciousness about the messaging we're putting out or the content we're putting out? Like, hey, here's the music video we're going to do. Like, how do we come together with all of this stuff and making sure that we have healthy working relationships, because that's how things maintain, because it's hopefully, the first thing that you put out is a success, but not always, which means sometimes you have to hang in there until it clicks in. But how does it not eat itself before the thing clicks in? You know what I mean? When it comes to working with others.
Yeah. I was thinking about this, and it's so crazy that, I mean, when you look at humans and the way we interact with each other in romantic or business relationships, and the thing you think about how there's cycles of time where people, some people like, oh, like they date for 3 months, and then they're like, okay, it's either you're in or out. And so like, or it's 6 months, you're in or out, and you can kind of only date someone for so long before you're a couple. And then at what point do you have to move in?
Yeah.
And if I look at my own life, and there's sort of cycles of like 2 to 4 years. Like 2 years is a norm, 4 is really long in like a my marriage.
Yeah.
Like if I look at dating, or like you look at your life, you're like, yeah, most people, you know, they're high school and then they're college and then they're first and whatever. There's cycles, and you don't usually go, here's what I need, here's who I am, here's what I'm ready for. They meet somebody and like, it's like very caveman or cavewoman was like, ugh, and they're like, you, right? And then you like, you figure these two rough edges that bump up against each other until it's smoothed out like rocks that sort of can sit next to each other or atop each other for a
Yeah.
period of time until
Yeah.
it goes in separate ways. But what, for the first time, what I thought of recently, which is pretty scary that it only occurred to me, is I don't think that people in creative partnerships, whether it be like music or screenwriting, I don't think that people vet them those relationships
Mm.
properly before they go into it. I think that they're like, you're the best guitar player I know, and I really like you because I know you to only a certain extent, right? You're my buddy, you're a great guitar player, I want to play with you. Or she's an incredible, you know, writer, we should
Yes.
partner up and make a screenplay. But
Yes.
you're not thinking about, you don't know the red flags necessarily of what's going to happen when you're in a pitch meeting and she's just like, in like, I'm not making those changes, and you're like, whoa, like, or you don't think about the red flag of like what it's going to be like sitting next to that guitar player on a 3-hour delay in a South American airport,
Oh,
or a total fucking nightmare, or whatever the
oh,
thing is, right?
yes.
So these are hypotheticals, but one thing that I realized is, you know, through really doing some examination and looking at my sort of life on paper, is, wow, like I don't think that I would ever, from this point of my life forward, enter into a creative partnership sort of on enthusiasm and promise and possibility
Mm.
without really examining who I was getting into that situation with. Because, you know, whether you're, you know, a sketch comedy group or whether you're a rock band, it doesn't matter, because you're really just in a relationship with that person.
Yes.
It doesn't really matter what you're making. It doesn't matter if you're making a home together or if you're making records. You're just a relationship.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it could be healthy, it could be unhealthy, it could be a lot of things, but they're really fucking challenging.
Yes, no, usually when I tell people about going into healthy collaborations, is I usually, before I pull the trigger on anything, just based on surface level, right? Where it's like, I look at them online. You know what I mean? Are they fighting with people online? Are they posting stuff that I agree or don't agree with? Do their photos look crazy? You know what I mean? Because people will let you know who they are, and you need to listen. You need to listen to them.
Listen.
Like, oh my God, yeah. And then it's like, okay, how's the communication going? You know what I mean? Does it take them 4 days to return a text? You know what I mean? Do I just get the letter K? You know what I mean? Like, how's their email game? You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like sometimes people are showing you who they are in the world. And I feel like for me, because I do see this promotional component as such a interesting and important component when it comes to being of service to your art, I really do look at how people are online. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean like you got to have 1 million followers. I don't give a fuck about that. I give a fuck about who you are as a person and what you are willing to put in your house online. Like, what are you willing to say about it? And how are you supporting other people? How are you a part of the conversation? Are you against the conversation? Are you weirdly quiet? Like, what's going on with whatever?
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's really funny too, because like you know, so like the pandemic really it's really, I mean, I'm trying to say this in a way, like everyone, like my experience is so far from unique, and like the great equalizer right, except for really economic things. But the great equalizer was March of 2020. And
Yes.
so I think back often, and I'll make jokes of like, what do you think? It's like February 2020. Like, you're just like, we're just like, hey, like everything's fucking totally normal, or like, just like no idea that like there was this drop off on the road ahead. Like
Totally.
and the Blues Brothers when they're racing on the freeway with the white supremacists behind them and the freeway ends. Like, I just feel like we're all on that road thinking everything was great, and then this happens. And I think that we know that, like, as a writer, I live by conflict reveals character, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
like in life, conflict reveals character. So much of our existence is this now. It's just this, and it's this, and it's and I mean, it's insane. Like, and I'm so guilty of it too. But so much of this is performative, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
so, and even if whether we're talking about just in everything,
Yeah.
everything is a performance, right? Whether
Yes.
it's like, this is the best sandwich ever, or um or just look at me as a sort of thing, right? So here's the larger thing is, okay, so how does one promote in a world where everyone, not even creators, promotes daily, where
Mm.
people are promoting themselves as, I'm the fucking best, like I'm happy, I'm on vacation, like
Mm.
this performance of, oh my god, like I just ate here, you have to know, snap a pic of the sign, or best Tulum vacation ever, or whatever. I was joking with my buddies that like I felt like, honestly, like you couldn't live in Los Angeles and be a white male unless you went to Big Sur with your family at some point during quarantine. And I was joking with my buddies who actually had done that. It's like, and I was like, and that's the luxury not everybody gets. But
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, when the pandemic hit, I used it as an opportunity to recalibrate my life. And
Mm.
I was very aware very early of what was coming and what was going to happen,
Mm.
and the possible ramifications to life.
Mm.
um I was not caught as flat-footed as some. Now, it
Yes.
doesn't mean that I didn't have to scramble and pivot, and that it
Yep.
wasn't fucking terrifying and all these things.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know what date is like when most people started like living their lives differently, or like buying cleaning products and hoarding toilet paper and getting like nitrile gloves and stuff. But I know that for me, there's text threads I have in late February talking to people about COVID and what could possibly happen in the United States. And that by the beginning of March, um, in the very beginning of March, I was like, this is coming here, but I don't think it's going to be as big as it. And so I'm still like living my life at the office. I had a writing room job, doing some things. And then by like March 6th, like I was at a Laker game, like with a bandana on my face and rubber gloves. And I was like, I saw two people in Staples Center that were also wearing masks. And think about that, like March 6th, I'm wearing gloves and a bandana at Staples Center, and there was one guy in front of me with an N95 and a couple I saw with N95s out of all of Staples Center.
Oh.
So you think about the awareness, and I was terrified, abject terror, going, I can't believe I'm here. This is the last game I'm going to of the season. This is insane. And still not processing, this is the second to last game of the season, because it is coming like you think, like, and how
Yes.
fast. So
Yeah.
by the time it was a couple, and like that night was my last meal out, and then
Yes.
I locked down on the 7th.
Yep.
And all that to say, I brought all of my equipment from studios and outside places to this space right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to, and I canceled some shows that She Wants Revenge was supposed to do in Mexico. We were definitely not willing to travel,
Yes.
mostly because we didn't want to be at LAX, because I knew that was like a serious like vector, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
And as the world was kind of going, wait, what's going to happen? I kind of went, okay, like get ready. Like this is like the tidal wave is coming. And then it did, and it was way worse than I even. And then I was like listening to a podcast that I like got from a friend and I shared with people, and they were like everybody's getting it and it's going to take over the whole world. And like it wasn't like a conspiracy person, it was an epidemiologist.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, the entire world is going to change as we know it. I was like, and once I realized, oh, these things happen in civilization and it's our turn. And
Yes.
like there are pandemics that happen and we will come out the other side of it. I immediately was like 18 to 24 months, get ready. And I knew. And so I just flipped the switch
Mm.
so that I could mentally prepare
Yeah.
for taking care of my family, living my life, being a creative person, and finding a
Yes.
way to live within it. Because I just said, like, it's like if you go on a run and you're at the gym, you're on whatever your thing is. If you know you're gonna do like 2 miles, you just like, okay, like it's gonna suck, and after 5 minutes I'm gonna be tired, but I'm gonna make the 2 miles. Like I was like 18 to 24 months, and then afterwards it's not gonna be the same, but it'll be something.
Yeah.
And so when I prepared for that very early, so I wasn't really caught flat-footed, I also was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to go back to the way things were after. And like, I really realized that pretty early on. Um, it wasn't until like 3 or 4 months of survival mode and figuring things out that I had the comfort. And also like I started a nonprofit with, well, a couple of people that I know were starting a nonprofit, and I joined them, and I was a co-founder of a nonprofit. So from March to like June, it was like service, 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 service to get out of the like fear of like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And like,
Yeah.
and also as like an artist who like lives by this promotion stuff, it was tricky. So, and I had nothing to promote. And like, so all that to say, like, as a touring musician who was had a slot to perform at the last festival that played in the I think in the world, which is this Mexican festival, Viva Latino, and like I was like, I'm not going. And like my bandmate was like, we're not going. And we canceled, and like Guns N' Roses still played, and it was like the last festival. And I was like, that's crazy. And like the promoter, it's so funny, was like there's like 13 cases in Mexico. And I was like, you guys, like there's 13 cases. I'm like, there's 13 cases you know of, and I'm
Yeah.
not getting in a metal cylindrical tube with
Oh my God.
recirculating air at LAX.
Germ
And I was
tube.
just like,
Yeah.
there's just no way. And so I sat here, battened down the hatches, was working on a project, was working on a She Wants Revenge record. And then like a bunch of things sort of happened inside and out that made me go, it's like in life, we're in situations and things are routine, and you just do it and you do it and you do it. You never think like, well, why do I put on those shoes? Well, they're by the door, right?
Mm.
They're by the front door. So I put
Mm.
on those shoes. But
Right.
like to live sort of with purpose or intention or consciously and like awake to go, well, why do I do things that way? Right. And like if something works, we often don't question that. And so my band was technically working. I was making a certain amount of a living from it, and it did have success, meaning like an audience and appreciation, and there was a business behind it.
Mm.
It was also something where we hadn't put out a record in probably like 8 or 9 years. And it was like a reunion tour that my band was on. It was like a reunion that stuck. It's like when you break up with somebody and then you go on a date, and then like you just find yourself like, oh, we live together again. And you're like, okay, it's working, right? So for me, the pandemic was an excuse to just look at everything and go, okay, what was my life before and what do I want it to be now and after?
Mm. Yeah.
And when I asked myself those questions, coupled with the fact that in the middle of trying to figure out how we're going to survive I've used this sort of bit before, but in the middle of trying to figure out how we're going to survive outbreak, like it turns into Children of Men. And like, well, actually, first it turns
Mm,
into like a civil rights revolution. And you're like, okay, like we're wearing masks and like life is insane.
I
And
know. Yes.
everyone's now, even our kids are learning online. So we're all more online than ever. And everyone's um dying for interconnected, like dying for connection and dying for intimacy because we're all separated. And so we're now, okay, like everybody got nice, everybody got kind, right? So like the internet is the meanest place in the world, but all of a sudden it got very nice because everybody wanted to touch and be near each other and do this, right? And we just want to be able to eat indoors and be around each other. And then in the middle of that, it's like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, boom, boom, boom. The world is on notice. Holy shit, racism still exists. All these things are unjust.
Exactly.
And then as a result, because of what you and I know about intersectionality and like different types of oppression, that, well, naturally there's going to be a resurgence of the Me Too and the Time's Up
Mm,
movement.
mm.
Because if one oppressed group is having a moment of reckoning, well, then of course the others are going to come back, especially when it was just a year before. So
Yes.
now you're in a civil rights revolution, you're in another layer and level of reckoning of Me Too and Time's Up.
Mm.
And then as a result of all this, now we're like, holy shit, like we're in outbreak. Now we're in Children of Men because we're in this crazy authoritarian rule where they're saying maybe there'll be no election, maybe there'll be no constitution. And we're
Mm.
all sitting indoors going, wait a minute, we can't even see our parents, we can't hug each other, we can't eat in restaurants, we can't go outside without masks and gloves. And now they may suspend the normal like democratic process, and we
Mm.
may be in a true like sort of authoritarian oligarch sort of thing. And you're just like, are we Venezuela, are we Russia? Like it was so crazy, right? And then if you don't look at that and say, okay, there is no more normal. What do I want my life to be? Right. So then everyone who normally is promoting their fucking yoga class or their fucking record or their stand up thing, whatever it is, suddenly you're not allowed to, because
Yes.
it would be it would be very bad form to do
Yes.
so
Yes.
while people are just struggling to they can't get through on their EDD and their unemployment and
Oh.
their,
Ugh.
and like also like from a very technical, like from a very like nuts and bolts way, like when everyone is basically like jammed up, like I joke often that like for the first like 6-7 months of the pandemic, I was just like doing like CAPTCHA things like,
Yes.
yes, that's a hillside. Like trying to recover a password. Yes, that's a parking meter. Yes, that's a bicycle. Like I feel like I spent months of the pandemic doing that or trying to remember passwords or trying to like sites were down, and it was just like a cycle of just, it was like this Kafka-esque complete like head fuck. And then for me, I was like, I can't play live music. I don't know when I'm going to be able to. Okay, when I do, what do I want it to look like? And like,
Yes.
that's a question that most people don't ask themselves. Or I can't go on vacation with my family. What do I want that to look like when I'm done? Or,
Yes.
okay, how am I spending my days? Like, what do I want my relationship with my family to look like? Or what do
Oh.
I like, all these things. And
Yeah.
so I really use it as an excuse to completely stop and not pretend like everything was okay the way it was, and to examine it. And part of that was going, yeah, I don't want to be in this band anymore. And it really came down to like me doing some writing and thinking about my life and looking at it on paper and going, wow, I was 30 years old when I started that band, and now I'm 47, and
Mm.
that's a different person. And I
Mm.
don't want to have to come out of a once in 100-year pandemic and present that old person to the world.
Yes.
And so as it relates to promotion, I was like, okay, I made a solo record, and I spent all my time doing that and hanging with my family and sort of planting seeds for the other creative like film and things I was doing. I'd written and directed a short film in 2019, and I was doing post, and it became more relevant than ever as a result of everything that happened in 2020. And so I started finishing that and finishing other projects, and a couple of projects I was like, like, I don't, why would I care about that in 2021 or 22? And so I was like, that's gone. What's the next thing? Like, what matters? Um and I started to like recalibrate and refocus what I wanted to do. And then this is like the like larger, like that's like ultimately like you kind of have to know what goes on behind it in order to promote it, right? And so for me, like I was like, now I have a solo record that's done, and like I have a website that I'm working on, and all of these things that are like really. So I realized that 2022 is going to be the 30th anniversary of me putting out my first record, but that this year was going to be 29 years of music. And I went, that's crazy. If you click on my Wikipedia, it's got like 4 or 5 things that are like really disparate and weird. I'm like, no one's ever told my story, and promotion is telling your story. And I was
Yes,
like,
yes, yes,
and
yes.
I was like, okay, well, no one's ever told my story properly, so maybe I should start doing that. So like the first thing I did in March, when I realized it was time to start to change the way that I knew that this was going to be some new 3.0 of like all entertainment and media. And I was like, okay, the first thing I have to do is I have to tell my story. And so I started working on a website that's not even live yet.
Mm.
And the website was, okay, how do you tell the story of somebody that like at 16 got a record deal with Quincy Jones and started making hip hop, and you know 15 years later was like fronting a sort of, for lack of a, to really generalize it, like a new wave goth band, like touring the world. Like there's a lot of story. So
Yeah.
I made a website that told my story in the most comprehensive and thorough way, visually, through sound, through moving pictures, through everything. Like this is everything. And I was documenting, I was digitizing old VHS tapes, uploading old interviews, like the
Wow.
most thorough, comprehensive thing, because I was like, no one can tell my story but me, and it's my job to do so. And it was also a willingness to come out of the pandemic and claim ownership over my own thing and be able to present it to the world in a way that's authentic and comprehensive and holistic. Because what I realized as a result of the pandemic was I was doing a little bit of service work and activism. And I hesitate to use the word activist because I think people who are activists are really like, that's what they do on the front lines
Yeah.
all the time. But
Yeah.
like dipping my toes into activism, I was writing essays that were towards that. I was making music and I was making film. And I was like, and they're all a little bit different, but parts of myself. What I realized is that I no longer wanted these to be compartments of myself, and that I wanted them all to be the same thing. And that I didn't want there to be any division between my music and my activism. I didn't want there to be any division between my film making and my screenwriting and my essay writing. Yes, one could be funny, one could be thought provoking, they can all be whatever, but they all have to be coming from the same spine and the same purpose. And so I started the process of cutting out anything that got in the way of that. So I mean, really what it was I started doing this website. I started making a solo record, and I quit the band that I co-founded, in 2004, and was like, I'm done. It's dissolved. Like, we're done. I love
Mm.
you. Let's be friends,
Yeah.
but let's continue the friendship. But creatively, I need to figure out what's next. So now that we're coming out the other side to some degree, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and people are like, okay, like there's going to be live music. I mean, last night, this is like connected to your life, but I was at a birthday party, and there was like, they had stand-ups come, and it was really incredible to watch people, not only to be outside with people laughing and being together, but every comic, to a man and woman, was like, it feels amazing to be on a mic right now because I haven't done
Oh,
this in a year. And it was like, there was some like amazing comics and like, there were some amazing people, but I talked to them afterwards and I went up to them and I said, I know what you felt. Like, I haven't performed in a year, except
Mm,
if it was on fucking Instagram Live or Zoom or, you
right.
know, just like impromptu playing guitar and people giving feedback. So it was so cool to see them doing what they love, them getting the therapy and the release and the fun and the
Mm,
connection and the expression in the moment. And it felt like a little bit of normal. And so like when I, for somebody that was like easily like, listen to her single, it's the best. Listen to my friend, he's amazing. Like I just fire that off and I will write essays about how everyone else is so fucking great. And I struggle with going back to the beginning. Like, how do I struggle with, like, I struggle with, man, like I know how talented I am, but it's so hard to tell people because I don't want to sound like a dick,
mm-hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
what I found during quarantine was I started going on Instagram Live and it felt super weird as like a middle-aged man talking to my camera to my phone, like, and seeing like bloop 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 people popping into the room. And I remember like I was like, this is so awkward and weird. And because it started with a question rather than a premise, it was just like, I don't
Mm,
know, right? Like I don't like, you know, that when you live your life, like I don't know, like there's so much more possibility than certainty, right? Like,
mm.
and so I was like, I don't know, let's see. And I started to talk and I play a song and I pick up a guitar and then somebody would pop in the room and go, hey Justin, boom boom boom, how you doing? And I'm like, oh my god, they're amazing. Like she was in this band we toured with, and I would tell a story and then I'd play her song and then someone else would pop up and I'm like, and it just became this free form jam. And like 20 people watched it and I got off and I was like, whoa, I felt like I just played a show. I felt like I just wrote a screenplay. Like I felt the creative release. And then like the next day I look and like 1,000 people watched it.
Yes.
And I'm like, wait a minute, like
Yep.
that's cool. And then people are like, when are you going to do that again? And then going, okay. And then all of the things that have sustained me creatively or financially through the last 6 months were a result of finding ways to organically allow people to see me for who I am and decide for themselves what level of engagement they wanted to have.
Yes, this is what we call, I've been calling like the pandemic pivot. You know what I mean? I've had Mark Maron on the show, and he, sits on his front porch and he connects with the amount of people that he normally would connect with at a sold out show, but he can do it, with the coffee and the cats, and he's connecting with people and getting that connection. And I really want to also hear more too about the website that you're working on as well, because I truly feel like the trick to connecting with an audience through social media and in general is to bring people along on with the story. You know what I mean? So how can you share of yourself? And I also help people figure out how to share. And I don't mean like curating a fake thing, because I feel like sometimes you should save some of it for you. You do have to save some of it for the creative process. You have to save a portion of it. You don't want to throw everything out, into the world. So we're going to hop on over to my Patreon and we're going to keep that conversation going, because I could talk to you forever about this stuff. You've got such fantastic insight and clearly such a long relationship. And it was almost kind of like you said, you were born into this. This has been a part of your training, dealing with an audience, what to do, what not to do, starting young and having these conversations. It really has kind of led so much to how natural you are in talking about this stuff and how much it is a part of you and how you see how important it is. But also, I do hear also too the resistance to it as well. You know what I mean? It's not
Sure.
all, because you really do care so much about the content, which means there's only so much time in our lives and in our day. And if you don't have the best thing that you can make to promote because you're spending all this time promoting, it's like you have to find that fucking balance. You know what I mean? So you guys, we're going to hop on over to my Patreon. You can follow Justin on all of the places to follow him and engage with him and see what happens with next for him. For right now, we're going to hop on over to my Patreon and keep the conversation going. Patreon.com/Melanie Vesey. So we'll see you guys over there.